I'd like to move on to a topic that we do have more control over, our nutrition. Julie Maris is a professor of ophthalmology within our department. It's in the medical school. It's wonderful to have a nutritionist embedded in the world of ophthalmology, as she's quite an expert on how nutrition can affect the eye. So I'd like to welcome Julie Maris to talk about nutrition and age-related macular degeneration.
Good morning. I'm delighted to be here with you and to share what we've learned about how foods we eat, supplements we take, may slow the development of AMD or prevent us from getting the disease. The details that are on my slide are explained in greater detail in handouts that can be found at the booth for our research team. And the website is also, I will post these slides on the website, and you can find that website on the handouts, as well as some recipes for healthy vision. So the good news that we've been talking about all morning is that the list of things that we can do for ourselves to lower our chances of having AMD or worsening AMD is much longer than the things that we can't control, like our genetic background. Most of you already have gotten routine eye exams, seeking good medical care to determine if there's treatments that are right for you. And you're keeping up to date by attending today, and likely you're well aware that it's best to protect our eyes by avoiding excess sunlight, by wearing sunglasses, and not smoking or quitting. I'm going to focus on the other things: eating well, being active, and for some, considering supplements. I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time getting this accurately down. Here's where I want to be. Okay, I wanted to tell you that the research I'm sharing with you today is based on research conducted by many people, and that is supported by many people. That includes our diet and health research team on the upper left that many of you have been visiting at the booth, getting your questions answered. It includes Dr. Blody, who co-directs many of the studies that we conduct, as well as directs the clinical eye research unit, where many of the tests are done for our studies, as well as the photographic reading center, where a lot of the images we take are graded for the presence and severity of AMD and other eye lesions. Also, there's other physicians at UW helping in our studies. Dr. Amitha Domopoli, who is an expert in grading these images. And we have also now added Dr. Yao Lu, who is a glaucoma expert, so we can study nutrition in relation to glaucoma. And Jim Verhoeven, who is a vision science expert, has been helping in our studies as well. You all contribute to our studies because taxpayers provide our NIH funds that supports a lot of our studies. And especially important are those of you who contribute as participants in our study, generously donating your time. This is true in a couple of the diet and vision studies that we've conducted in over 1,000 people in the Madison area over the last 15 years, and the AREDS 1 and AREDS 2. So thank you for that. Could not have done it without you. The evidence is pretty overwhelming that nutrition matters, as you've been hearing today. Clinical trials like AREDS have proven that the nutritional environment can slow the progression of age-related macular degeneration. I'm going to share with you results on some other smaller studies that also suggest some components of those supplements could improve vision. Many population studies, like the type that Dr. Klein and I conduct in large groups of people, give us ideas of risk factors, and there is a large body of evidence from population studies that suggest that nutrition and healthy diet can lower our chances of having early AMD. In our large study of about 2,000 women from the WHI, overall healthy diets lowered risk twofold. And diets work together with other lifestyles, physical activity, and not smoking. people who had healthy diets, physical activity, and not smoking had threefold risk lowering. I'm going to share with you 3 sets of data that are new. A little bit on lutein and zeaxanthin, the plant pigments that concentrate in our eye. I'll also share with you some recent publication results that suggest that healthy diet and lifestyles and adequate vitamin D status appear to lower the risk for having AMD associated with having high-risk genes. They may help us eat our genetic risk away, as a colleague recently said. And then finally, some early preliminary data suggesting that breastfeeding might even influence the eye health that we have in middle and older age. So lutein and zeaxanthin has been the focus of our research for many years. It is all around us. If you look outside and you see the yellow leaves on the trees, that comes from lutein and zeaxanthin. It concentrates in leafy green plants like trees and like kale and spinach because it participates in directing the light in the photosynthetic process. These are cells that also contain a lot of chlorophyll. That's what makes them green. You can see the lutein and zeaxanthin in your cooking pot. If you're boiling it with water, it's yellow. If you're boiling spinach and kale. And in our eye, it comprises macular pigment. It concentrates at the back of the eye where we have the highest density of cones, and the eye which tends to be most affected by macular degeneration, where it's known that it can absorb between 40 and 90% of the visible blue light that is so prevalent when we're outdoors, depending on the amount that you have in the back of your eye. I've shown 2 photographs, a cross-section of the retina taken in a monkey, much like a human, and you can see the yellow pigment that runs from the center and all the way out to the periphery and through many retinal layers. And in blue light, you see that it's dark, and that is indicating that the yellow pigment has absorbed the light. There, it can quench free radicals, which can have protective effects and lower inflammation, both in your eye and systemically. Lutein and zeaxanthin can enhance vision in people with and without AMD. There's increasing evidence for this. The strongest evidence is for visual acuity. There are several trials now that have shown that people who take lutein and zeaxanthin in foods or supplements can increase visual acuity over 6 months to 2 years and increase the ability to see contrasts. However, those studies show very modest improvements, and we're not really sure how much it's realistic to expect vision to improve in individuals and over the long term. So we're studying these relationships in a 14-year study in women that had participated in the Women's Health Initiative. Some studies have found people with more lutein and zeaxanthin pigment in their eye see better when there's distraction of blue lights. And we're investigating the possibilities that having more pigments in your retina adapt to seeing under dim lighting, especially when you move from, say, being outside to inside, or if you move throughout different areas of your house from areas of high luminance to low luminance. And an exciting area of research is that higher density of lutein in our eye might speed the processing of visual information from neuron to neuron, clear through to the brain, which also selectively concentrates lutein and zeaxanthin where it may be protective. So you've been told today a lot about the new National Eye Institute recommended supplement, the PreserVision, which now contains lutein and zeaxanthin, as most eye supplements sold right now do. So replacing replacing beta carotene with lutein and zeaxanthin was found to slow the development of advanced AMD by about 30% over 5 years. So talk with your doctor about whether this supplement or alternatives might be best for you. I'd like to point out that they tried omega-3 in this supplement to see if it further reduced the advancement to late AMD, and it didn't slow progression. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Now, if you've been to our booth, you've noticed that we can measure the plant pigments, lutein and zeaxanthin, simply and non-invasively, like we do in our research. And this slide shows 2,000 points from the individuals who participated in one of our studies, which indicates their intake of lutein and zeaxanthin along the horizontal axis and the density of lutein and zeaxanthin in the macula on the vertical axis. If you look at the red line, you can see that increasing intake of lutein and zeaxanthin is associated with, on average, higher lutein in your macula. But you see a lot of points that don't fit that line at all. There are people who have very low lutein intake but seem to have high amounts in their retina. We suspect that these are high responders to lutein intake. And there are people who have very high lutein and zeaxanthin intakes who have low amounts in their retina. We suspect they're low responders. So we've been comparing these people to get clues about what might increase lutein response. And I should also point out that in clinical trials, we know that on average about 30% of people who take lutein supplements in about a 2-year period of time do not increase macular pigment. So this idea of high and low responders has been borne out in clinical trials as well. Our clues are first genetic. We have found that gene variants for proteins which help escort lutein and zeaxanthin into our body, throughout our blood system, and into our eye and stabilize them in the eye are associated with higher macular pigment. But we've also found, as I just pointed out, that higher intakes of lutein are associated with more macular pigment. Of course, they're comprised of those. But even after adjusting for the amount of lutein that we take in, taking in a higher level of fruits and vegetables is still helpful in having higher macular pigment. It could be the other antioxidants in fruits and vegetables, or it could be that fruits and vegetables are high in dietary fiber, which we're now starting to pay attention because the healthy bacteria in our gut seem to like to eat fiber. And when we feed them that, they tend to have some good effects on our health, at least in rodents. It's still very early stage of investigation. We also know from trials that if you take the lutein with a little bit of fat, you're more likely to absorb it. So that might be one thing that explains the differences between high and low responders. Many different ways you can add fat, oils, nuts, avocados and eggs both contain lutein as well. And eggs have a particularly high bioavailable form of lutein. You can also add fish or fish oil to your diet to enhance absorption. Lifestyles might matter too. How might lifestyles help us get lutein in our eye? Well, a lot of our studies point to the fact that people who do not have diabetes have higher lutein. People who do not have high triglycerides have higher lutein. People who do not have high abdominal fat have higher lutein. Physical activity can help us avoid the chance of having those three conditions. I mentioned that fish and seafood may help the absorption of lutein. This has been shown in some fish oil supplements. We know that many population studies suggest people who eat fish are less likely to have or get AMD. And it might not be the omega-3 fatty acids. There might be other things in fish, as been mentioned earlier, such as vitamin D, which we have shown in our studies, when adequate levels in the blood exist, people in our studies are less likely to have AMD. Vitamin B12, a clinical trial has shown that a B vitamin supplement containing B12 has been associated with lower incidence of AMD. And fish oil also contains, or I'm sorry, not fish oil, the actual fish contain minerals like selenium and zinc, which are cofactors in our oxidation defense system. Physical activity, I mentioned this might be a way to help us become responders to lutein and zeaxanthin by lowering our chances of having a metabolic syndrome, diabetes, and also low blood pressure. But it can also provide us with an opportunity to make the sunshine vitamin, vitamin D, if we're outside and expose our skin to the sun. Not today, unfortunately, and not for another 6 months in Wisconsin, because the sun is at too low of an angle. So we can only make our own vitamin D when the sun is high enough levels. It doesn't take much, 15 to 30 minutes a day usually. But we have to find alternative sources otherwise. Light is also a trigger to other retinal cells that set our biorhythms, which can be important for getting a good night's sleep, which can have many health benefits as well. And Aldo Leopold reminds us that a walk in nature never fails to deliver more than we expect. So many good reasons to get physical activity. People who come to this symposium often say, I see that I'm taking a high-dose antioxidant. I hear that AMD runs in families. Should I tell my children, my sisters and brothers, that they should take antioxidants too? And there's no evidence that taking supplements will lower our chances of developing macular degeneration. However, there are plenty of things that you can tell people. There's a lot of research that healthy diets and lifestyles lower the estimated risk of having AMD, and especially in people who have 2 high-risk complement factor H CFH genes. In our study, we found a lowering odds of having AMD if you had 2 copies. So, as I mentioned, a colleague I was talking with recently said that we can eat away our genetic risk with healthy diets, and maybe that's true. If we get our antioxidants from our foods instead of supplements, there are other benefits. As I mentioned, they feed the healthy bacteria that live in our gut. And in rats that have healthier bacteria, there is less inflammation. You can take the healthy bacteria in a rodent and replace it with the unhealthy bacteria in another rodent, and that rodent can lose weight. We know it's very powerful, the microbes that live in our gut. So we're not just feeding our eyes. It's not just the chemicals that get into our body. It's also how happy we make our microbes. And this is an area we're still learning a lot about. We know very little. But some supplements might help, whether you have macular degeneration or family history. We've already told you about the high-dose antioxidants. But vitamin D could be important to lower your risk of AMD, especially if you have high-risk genes. Again, in the summer, you can get it from sunlight. And if you don't have daily sources of vitamin D in the winter, it might be important to take a daily supplement. And so sources would be fish, eggs, and fortified milk. B12 might be important to get. It was part of a supplement that lowered risk for macular degeneration, a trial that lowered risk for macular degeneration. And it could be especially important if you don't eat animal foods that tend to provide B vitamins. As far as vitamin B12, we now know that there are somewhere between 10 and 30% of people who don't absorb vitamin D well. Often people who have low acid in their stomach due to taking certain medications. So if you are worried about B12 levels, have your doctor test you, and if you have low levels, it might be important to take a supplement. Avoid excess though. They're medicines, especially at some of these high dose levels. They're not foods. They might pose benefits to some, risks for other people, and we really don't know a lot about how individual differences might make the level required or the level toxic different. Then there is some evidence for potential harm for several nutrients. So discuss it with your doctor and your healthcare providers. Let them know all you're taking because they can really add up. Okay, what's a good diet? People have wondered, well, there's so many good diets out there. Dietary guidelines for Americans are out there, Mediterranean diet, the dietary approach to stopping hypertension, which has been proven in trials to lower blood pressure. All of these have the same basic ingredients. They're all rich in plant foods. High in fruits and vegetables, 5 to 9 half-cup servings a day. Whole grains instead of refined grains. And a variety of protein sources that are often plant foods like beans, nuts, and seeds. So it's similar. We quibble about, whether or not we should have red meat, or whether or not they should be, moderate or low in fat. And there's probably individual differences in what we need. But high plant foods is really the take-home message. So a day that fosters eye health might contain for breakfast eggs with bioavailable lutein on top of a bed of greens, which are very high in lutein and zeaxanthin. I served mine, in fact, this morning, had mine on top of mashed avocado. And so there was lutein in all of those 3 things. Plus, it's really satisfying, really yummy. That recipe, by the way, is in the handout. Maybe for lunch, having green salad with fruits and vegetables rich in many antioxidants. Remember, a little bit of fat to help absorb the lutein. For snacks, consider red peppers, high in zeaxanthin. Nuts, which can help you control your blood sugar. For dinner, 3/4 of the plate should be plant foods, and half of that should be vegetables, are the current recommendations. You might consider for dessert having antioxidant-rich berries and maybe a dollop of yogurt for your bacteria, supplement your healthy bacteria. So finally, how early does nutrition matter in terms of the vision we have in middle and older age? Our preliminary data suggests maybe in the first year of life. We wondered about this because we've recently come to understand that breast milk is rich in lutein and zeaxanthin. It especially concentrates lutein and zeaxanthin higher than blood levels in nursing mothers. The colostrum, which is yellow early on in breastfeeding, is from lutein and zeaxanthin. But infant formulas don't contain lutein and zeaxanthin. It hasn't been routinely added. It's added to some now, but it's not very bioavailable. So in 2 of our studies, our large study of 2,000 women, and then a recent study, small study of 20 men and women who were breast and bottle fed, we found that people who were breastfed had higher density of lutein pigments in their eye than people who were fed infant formula. So we're interested in understanding, first of all, can we repeat this in a larger study? Second of all, if we can we compensate for this lower ability to accumulate lutein? We have some clues about why that might be. So over the first 6 months of life, the area where lutein and zeaxanthin particularly accumulate, the center of the macula, is under rapid development. And in monkeys who are lacking lutein in their diets, they have fewer cells which support the rods and cones throughout life by nourishing them, by removing their waste products. These are cells that after early life cannot be made. If they die, they can't be replaced except maybe by stem cell treatment, which Dr. Gamble will next tell us about. So it might be that there's a lifelong effect, and we don't understand how much that matters, but we'd like to study it. So this bottom line slide does not change from year to year when I come to the AMD Symposium. It seems to me that the bottom line for what we can do to preserve eye health is enjoy real food as opposed to processed, all types, but mostly plants, move and enjoy the outdoors. Start with simple changes, one at a time, and supplements might help avoid excess, pass it on. You don't just pass on your genes, but you could pass along healthy lifestyles. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. I think you've really been ahead of your time with your message.